Welcome. Out of the Blue, number 519B. We're reading from J. Hewat McKenzie's Spirit Intercourse, 1916 edition, page 188. The Astral World. A man at death who has lived a worthy life should rise by a law of his being into the third sphere, but only a limited number arrive there. The majority, with less perfection, remain upon the first and second spheres. Skipping to page 192. With the object of supplying some accurate details regarding these lower spheres, a number of able spirits assisted the author, who was shown scenes from the spirit spheres projected upon an astral screen. These pictures consisted of actual occurrences taking place at the time they were shown, and were produced by the help of many spirits. While these were being shown, an explanation was supplied by one advanced spirit from a higher sphere, who has worked in cooperation for some time with the author. It will only be possible to give a brief sketch of some of these strange incidents of the state of man after death. Most disagreeable pictures were shown of the rocky astral spheres where were congregated the souls of men and women lost in shame and misery, seeking satisfaction in practices of the most degrading kind. Some are shown huddled together like flocks of sheep and seemingly quite as frightened. A herd of these was shown in a pit measuring some 2 miles in width. The atmosphere, though dark, was sufficiently illuminated to show in outline the surrounding cliffs which towered high overhead. Near the center of this rocky gorge lay a dark cloud, considerably denser than the surrounding atmosphere, which rose as an emanation from the bodies of a number of men and women standing closely huddled together. This cloudy matter did not pass off as vapor would from the bodies of a flock of sheep when huddled together on a wet day, but hung amongst them as a cloud will sometimes hang on a mountaintop. Probably 150 spirits stood thus huddled together, their bodies in some cases looking perfectly black, while others were slightly luminous. These wretched creatures in this particular vault were quite unable to see each other, but were dimly conscious of each other's presence. Most of them were even ignorant that they had passed through the change of death, and acted very much as people act who walk in sleep. This inability to see was due to the deadened state of the organs of sight, which kept them practically blind and in darkness, so that if one of them wandered off some little distance from the others, he only gravitated to them again by a kind of magnetic attraction. Occasionally one would creep out from the crowd, and after reaching a short distance would stop, look around, and then, as if frightened, would dart back into the middle of the group. After months of this kind of existence, these spirits began to awake to their surroundings, and like sheep will wander away one by one from the crowd, returning to it at continually wider intervals, only to leave again, a fuller consciousness gradually asserting itself, and a steady improvement in the power of vision taking place. When separated from the crowd, they perceive the light from above, and endeavor to reach it by clambering up the rocks. Several of these who had detached themselves were seen climbing the surrounding cliff at various altitudes, seeking a means of escape. Rising higher by great effort, they entered an atmosphere both light and pure in comparison with that which they had experienced below, and a desire for still better conditions sprang up within them. The memory of their wretched state and the company with whom they had been associated so long became repulsive, and spurred them to further effort to reach the cliff top which towered overhead. In these efforts to rise, they fell from giddy heights again and again, but without receiving any bodily hurt, though greatly hurt in spirit and undergoing agony of mind. These, as they fell to the cliff base, reminded one of caterpillars mounting the rough bark of a fruit tree, falling back again and again in a vain attempt to reach the leaves or the fruit above, but rising each time still more determined to reach its goal. The efforts to escape gradually produced a striking improvement in the bodily appearance of the spirits. For their bodies and clothing, while with the crowd, presented a black, dense appearance, but after several real attempts to climb the cliffs, these became considerably lighter in weight and color. After long and anxious effort, they at last found a way where the steps had been cut in the rock by thoughtful hands, and this giving them a better footing, they finally reached the summit. These rocky gorges communicate with each other by narrow passages, and by narrow passages and tunnels which are seldom used by spirits. Thus each gorge is practically separated from the others on that account. Look at that picture again. It may be asked why helpers do not enter these gulfs and show those who desire to leave a way to escape. There are several reasons why this is not done. First, it is prohibited by the higher minds who control these spheres, who will not allow a soul to be helped until it makes a real effort to help itself. Secondly, the effort to find an exit purifies the soul and awakens it to that consciousness which is necessary before a higher spirit can make its presence known. One such spirit instructor volunteered the information that it was difficult to find controlled and wise helpers who would not seek to assist the escape of residents prematurely by entering these pits in their anxiety to help them. They had learned through years of experience that until one is fully ripe for help, proffered service is often a hindrance, and to bring any out of the reformatories before their time is unwise and disastrous to helpers and helped. Sexual indulgence. Another gorge inspected was devoted to beings whose lives had been given over to excessive animal lusts. The picture here described is one of such a bestial character that those of a supersensitive nature may prefer to leave the next few pages unread. The author, however, believes the subject too important to be omitted, and therefore supplies a few details of what life in spirit spheres offers to those whose lives on earth were wholly centered on the things of the flesh. Reformatories for the correction of sexual vice are very plentiful on the lowest sphere, for such actions lead the human family into the most degraded depths of the spiritual world. I'm going to add right here that in Swedenborg, sex brings a person to the highest heights of the spiritual world. So he says sexual vice leads the human family to the most degraded depths of the spiritual world. So I guess what you would call sexual virtue, which according to Swedenborg means sex with your spouse, your husband or wife, essentially. Swedenborg talks about marriage in the spirit world, and according to him, the very pinnacle of the spirit world is reached through devotion to your spouse, basically. So it's interesting that here the lowest depths of the spiritual world, the most degraded depths, are a result of sexual vice, whereas in Swedenborg, the very highest heights of the spiritual world are reached through a kind of a sexual virtue, which is sex with your spouse. So, within the shadows of a wide and deep gorge lay a large lake. This is the sexual indulgence section. So, sexual indulgence. Within the shadows of a wide and deep gorge lay a large lake, from the black water of which emanated a heavy steam-like moisture, with a stench similar to that which proceeds from a cesspool. If you don't know what a cesspool is, back before they had plumbing and before they had septic tanks, all the piss and crap would go into the cesspool. So a cesspool is a big pond full of crap and piss, basically. So, steam like moisture with a stench similar to that which proceeds from a cesspool. Its size is about a mile square, and dotted over its surface were seen a number of human heads in pairs. On the banks stood a man and woman, as if about to enter the water together, but the woman seemed loath to do so, owing to the disagreeable odor which arose from its surface as it was disturbed. Both seemed of middle age. The man's face was sullen and brutish, but the woman was horrible and ghastly in appearance. Her jaw had dropped to the side so that her chin rested upon her chest, and the mouth stood wide open. The mouth stood wide open. The eyes were lusterless like those of a dead fish. The face was the face of dead flesh, and the hair fell over it in loose and careless wisps. The woman stood irresolute, as if wishing to turn away, but the man ultimately prevailed upon her, and together they entered the pool. Several of the older residents, standing some little distance off upon the bank, jeered, and one, pointing his hand towards them, said with a scornful laugh, "Ha! These poor simpletons imagine they can play the old game of earth here. They will soon realize that such hunger goes unsatisfied in this dead world." At the edge of the pool lay a woman with her head upon the bank, sick and groaning and asking to die, for the vapors in which she lay seemed as if they would choke her. No one offered her help, for all were too self-centered to give her a thought, and anyone whose compassion could be aroused at such a sight would have been too good for such a place. Compassion does sometimes arise, but it is a sign of reformation, and when it appears, that one is ready for a higher state. The drunkard's pit. A dwelling of drunkards was shown, where men and women were congregated in various stages of dejection and filth, and where the craving for drink was felt more or less keenly. Some who had been there for years were beginning to lose their desire for alcohol, and occasionally interested themselves in others around them. In course of time, this awakened interest would lead them also to a happier state by lightening the spirit body and enabling it to scale the cliffs which kept it a prisoner. Well, that's good for now. How we doing for time? 12. Okay. I'll point out one more thing. So here's this map that I've shown. This is a map published in the year 1916 in that book. And in it, let's see if I can... It contains actual numbers, actual miles. Let's see. 35,580 miles from the surface, from Earth's surface. That's the outer edge of what he's calling the spirit spheres. And the inner edge, the beginning of the first sphere, he says, is about 300 miles above Earth's surface. So if you see here, it's really small writing, but it says Earth's atmosphere. So there's the Earth. Where are we? Here's the Earth. And that little gap there is the atmosphere. Then there's a first sphere, second sphere, third sphere. And according to Hewat and McKenzie, if you live a good life on Earth, you go to the third sphere. And if you need some sort of reformation, you go to the first two spheres. But he separates the spirit spheres into the first heaven and the second heaven. And these numbers correspond specifically. You can look up the Van Allen belts on Wikipedia or anywhere, and the Van Allen belts are said to go to 36,000 miles above Earth, but they're also said to fluctuate slightly. And so 35,580 is exactly within the parameters of the actual Van Allen belts, which was not discovered until 1950. So here's a map from 1916 of the spirit spheres, where we supposedly go when we die. It has an inner ring and an outer ring. It's the Van Allen belts. The Van Allen belts are the spirit spheres, aka heaven. Thanks, see you, bye.